Let's start today with sort of a general assessment of where the 2024 election cycle is more broadly. This is not about individual battleground state polling or who's likely to win Pennsylvania or what's likely to happen with Tammy Baldwin's Senate seat. This is the bigger picture question of what is the trajectory of the Democratic Party if they are indeed able to hold/sweep in November. What is the future of MAGA in that scenario? And then also, what is the responsibility for Democrats that comes with the possibility of controlling the White House, House, and Senate versus what are we potentially up against if there is a Trump win and MAGA is able to maintain itself? And this gets to what I consider to be the most important potential inflection point in November of 2024. Is this effectively the beginning of the end for MAGA? Some would say the beginning of the end was 2018, after Trump won in 2016 and things started going not so well for Republicans and not so well in 2020 or 2022 or 2023. But could this be the official beginning of the end for MAGA? Or could this be the reinforcement of MAGA as a political force? Now, there's a very interesting op-ed that I'll call your attention to and that we will link to in the YouTube description for this video. It's an op-ed in the Washington Post by Ramesh Ponnuru, and it says Democrats could sweep the 2024 elections and make major policy changes. This time, Manchin and Sinema, Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, won't be in the Senate to constrain them. And the article, the op-ed points out, in not particularly controversial terms, that what Democrats want to do in November is keep the Oval Office, keep the Senate, and take the House. This would give Democrats complete and total control at the federal level of both houses of Congress and of the Oval Office. This is sometimes called the trifecta. And if you have an ambitious legislative agenda that is at least somewhat popular with the American people, you have the opportunity to achieve significant legislative accomplishments when you have that control. It doesn't always happen. If we think back to periods, for example, when Barack Obama had that, we saw some major accomplishments like Obamacare, and we also saw the inability to even pass something like a universal background check bill. And of course, that has everything to do with moneyed interests, special interests, Republican obstructionism, and many other things. So if indeed Democrats could hold/take full control in November, it would be seen as an opportunity to push through significant policy changes and initiatives that would hopefully reflect the reality that the American electorate has moved to the left on just about every issue over the last 40 years, whether it's, hey, we should, generally speaking, use taxes on the very wealthy to fund social programs and ensure some basic standard of living. That's more popular than ever among the American electorate. Doesn't mean we all want 90% marginal tax rate, but it means that as a general concept, that's something that the country is in favor of. We've talked about on abortion. We've talked about on gay marriage. We've talked about so many things. In general, the country has moved to the left. If Democrats do take the House, keep the Senate, get Joe Biden reelected, it's going to be crucial for them to actually capitalize on that opportunity. And what is the other side of this? The other side of this is maybe this really will be, what was it that De Sanctimonious used to say? The dustbin of history, okay? We've got to push MAGA into the dustbin of history and say, hopefully, if Democrats sweep, they will be rewarded with the ability to make some achievements. The counterpoint to this is that if Democrats do sweep and have the opportunity to enact legislation and have the opportunity to push MAGA into the toilet, but they don't accomplish anything major in the next 2 years of Joe Biden's presidency, it will hurt in 2026. And it could potentially hurt big in 2028. Now, you have a bunch of different strategic and tactical approaches that can be taken with regard to what to do electorally and how to divide up what is a limited amount of campaign funding. There are high profile folks like, for example, Ted Cruz and other Republican senators facing pretty strong Democratic challenges. We've talked about the Ted Cruz one in Texas, for example. But if you put too much money and resources into trying to flip those longer shot seats, do you potentially lose seats that you currently hold? You do want to target prominent Republicans. There's symbolism that's important there. There's the potential to make a big dent in the Republican Party if you do that. But at the same time, you don't want to lose seats you hold or more winnable seats because of these shiny objects you might focus on. So these are sort of tactical questions that the DNC is going to have to figure out. There are also some internal divisions in the Democratic Party. Now, I don't want to pretend that the divisions within the Democratic Party are as significant as the divisions within MAGA. Nearly 40%, within the Republican Party, rather, nearly 40% of Republican primary voters voted for someone other than Donald Trump. That is major division. Now, within the Democratic Party, yes, there are factions that aren't thrilled with Joe Biden. They don't think he's done enough when it comes to tax reform, for example, although could he really get that done without controlling the House? I don't think so, but okay. There are those within the Democratic Party that aren't pleased with Biden when it comes to Israel, Gaza. But big picture, the internal divisions among Democratic voters right now, I believe, are far smaller than what the Republican Party is experiencing. So where we end up is with a potential referendum in 2024. It's a referendum on, hey, on paper, Biden's been one of the most progressive and effective presidents, certainly of my lifetime. Are we going to reelect him on that basis or not? And on the other hand, is this the end for MAGA? Because, I mean, listen, Marjorie Taylor Greene's not going to be defeated by all the polling that I'm looking at. She will almost certainly remain in the House of Representatives. But if Trump loses again, and if Republicans riding on this MAGA train don't do well again, especially if they lose the House, even if Marjorie Taylor Greene gets reelected, if Republicans lose the House, this really could be the beginning of the end for MAGA, such that in 2028, with Trump in his 80s and presumably completely out of politics, I'm thinking optimistically here, you really see Republicans go in a completely different direction, and we can maybe get back to more reasonable disagreements about policy rather than arguing about the fundamental tenets of democracy and whether the person that wins should actually get to be president. So there's a lot of important aspects to this: campaign tactics and strategy for Democrats, articulating a clear progressive vision that will mobilize voters versus just getting them to say, well, I don't like Trump, but I don't really know what Biden's for. All of those things are important. I do believe this is the most important election in a long time. Let's put it that way, without being hyperbolic. And we will be covering every aspect of it. It is time to start thinking like voters and to make sure that kids understand the importance of voting, how it works, registering, ballot initiatives, because so many kids just have no idea. That's why I wrote the new children's book, Think Like a Voter. I can think of no better time and no more important group of folks to try to reach. The book is now available at davidpakman.com/book, where, by the way, you can get the first 2 books in the series as well. Think Like a Detective and Think Like a Scientist. Really important stuff. Donate them to local libraries, classrooms, read them with the kids. davidpakman.com/book.